I'm Oscar Eustace, Artistic Director here, and welcome to the Public Theater. Welcome to Joe's Pub. And welcome to the last of our fall duets, Jeremy McCarter's brilliant brainchild, which is to take this fall. Yeah, we should all applaud for Jeremy, right? And the basic idea was to take this fall rededication and to try to put together some of the smartest people who work in the theater with some of the smartest people who don't work in the theater and let them talk to each other and see what they have to say to each other. I'm about to introduce two people who have absolutely no need of introduction to this crowd. So instead, I'm going to tell you a brief story about my 90-year-old Aunt Ethel. When I first moved to New York, when I was 16 years old in the early 1970s, I was living in some garage basement somewhere, and Aunt Ethel took me under her wing, and she took me to the Metropolitan Opera. And the next week, she took me to the Village Vanguard. And I turned to her after that, and I said, Ethel, you're a communist. Why are you taking me to the Village Vanguard and to the Metropolitan Opera? And she said, it's very simple. I believe in one thing about life. Fight for the dictatorship of the proletariat and have as much fun as possible. And the particular thing that I just want to say about Tony Kushner and Rachel Maddow is that one of the great joys, they both have made inestimable contributions. One of the great joys is we have two lefties who are not dour, who are not pessimistic, who have a vitality, an energy, a lightness of spirit, a wit, a visceral optimism about what is possible for America that invigorates, I think I can safely say, all of us and ennobles all of us. So Rachel and Tony, if you would come on out. I give them to you.
That was nice.
Very nice. So I guess the format that we're following is we're going to talk. Okay. The format that we're going to follow, is this better? This is better. Is that we're going to talk for about an hour, and then we're going to take questions from you guys, and that's it.
It's very complicated. We've been working on it. There's a lot of rules.
And then Rachel is going to sing a couple of songs from Cabaret, and then we're done. So I'm going to start.
Okay. I'm really nervous. I'm sorry. I have to say, this is my caveat.
I was surprised to hear you say that. Do you want to explain to them why you're...
I wrote a book this year, and I did a book tour. Thank you. Which meant going out and talking to people in rooms. But usually when I talk, and when you all have seen me on television, it's just me and a person who is operating a camera. And that's it. It's either Rob or Jackie, and that's who I talk to. And if I imagine anybody else being able to see me, it's Susan, my partner Susan, who's here. Honey, where are you? Hoot. Oh, hi. And that's it. And so I'm not used to speaking in a way that people can see me, and I like you a lot, and I want this to go well. And I'm nervous, so I'm sweaty, and I'm going to talk too much, and that's what's going on.
All right. Well, don't be nervous. It'll
Okay.
be fine. I can't believe I'm saying that to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to think of you as Jackie, the camera person.
The book to which Rachel is alluding is Drift, which has been a New York Times bestseller for a long time, and is an extraordinary book, and I want to ask you a question about that, but in a little bit.
Okay.
I read recently, and I don't remember exactly where, that you described yourself as a liberal and described the President Obama, as a centrist Democrat. And I was surprised at that. Because I think of you as being more to the left than one would traditionally think of a liberal being, and that although I absolutely agree with you that the president is a centrist Democrat, I would think that a centrist Democrat was a liberal. So I started getting, and then I got into this long conversation with, I'm not supposed to say that it was my husband, but it was my husband, about what a progressive was, and his sense of the origin of that word was to find a replacement word for liberal. My sense of it was that it was a word that was originally introduced to find a way, sort of a meeting ground place between the radical left and the liberal left. So I don't know exactly what this question is, but I was interested about that. I mean, suddenly it's striking me as being a completely irrelevant thing, but these definitions are I mean, the president being the first president, I think, who's absolutely, clearly, recognizably of the left, but, you know, a centrist. So I don't know. Do these terms mean anything to you? Do you, or how, you know, I mean, we could start with liberal if you want to do that.
I think progressive ended up being way more interesting in the 2000s than we knew it was going to be, when the conspiratorial right decided that progressive was a nefarious thing. And so the right calls liberals progressives now as an epithet, because they think it's a Woodrow Wilsonian conspiracy to destroy the country from within. That's a 100-year plan. It's a Glenn Beck thing. So they've decided that progressive is scary. And so when people swear at me on Twitter in all caps, they use the word progressive. Like, I've unmasked you, progressive. I think, like, progressive's the name of an insurance company. I think it was, and I do think that liberals started using it in the 90s because they thought that liberal had become a dirty word from the right using it as an epithet, and that progressive just sounded more anodyne. So it's funny to see it as a term of vilification. I like liberal because
It upsets conservatives.
it doesn't upset conservatives as much as it used to, I don't think. I think that there's starting to be a little bit more subtlety around the idea of capital L liberal and lowercase l liberal, in part because the Republicans have been having a really interesting conversation among themselves about whether or not the libertarian streak within American conservatism is a useful thing. And so that's made them be sort of more subtle than they used to be about the idea of liberty and liberal and libertine, which is what they yell at each other now. You're not a libertarian, you're a libertine.
But when you say, that's really interesting, when you say that they're asking questions about whether or not the libertarian thing is useful to them, do you mean that there's always just been a kind of hypocrisy about the libertarian attitude, and they're now ready to jettison it because it's not winning them votes? Or you don't think it's a deeper commitment to it? I mean, because that would be great if that were true. I mean, if we could, like, get rid of the whole Ayn Rand, Ron Paul nonsense more easily. I've always believed that it was a more deeply ingrained thing in American, in the American right, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
It's interesting to me how angry conservatives get about the appeal of Ron Paul libertarian republicanism to young people. They want to appeal to young people, and they're realizing that really only Ron Paul is appealing to young people, and it makes them very angry, and they're trying to come up with an excuse to cut that part out of conservatism rather than using it in branding. I mean, when you can say, you know, we're all about small government and leaving people alone and freedom, it sounds awesome. When that's not what you're doing, the hypocrisy charge, I think, just sort of rolls off of them. But now they're actually, I think, trying to come up with an anti-libertarian conservatism.
So you mean like the new sort of questions that they're asking about Grover Norquist and this sort of moving away from the anti-tax pledges and all that stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
But so if they get rid of the theocratic part, because that's not winning them very much anymore, and they get rid of the libertarian part, and they can't, and they saw how well it worked to come out of the closet as just plutocrats who are out to get everybody's money and stuff it into their pockets. That didn't work very well for Romney. What are they? I mean, I don't know what the. It's like nothing.
You're onto
like
something.
Nothing there.
Yeah.
It's
great. It's. I mean, it really. I mean, what the Republican Party is, I think, functionally, is that they represent business interests and the interest of the wealthy. Not the elite, I don't think. I think specifically it's
Right.
the wealthy. It doesn't matter anything else about you. And they've used libertarian branding and they've used the sort of theocratic stuff to get votes and mobilize people. But that was never what they were actually pursuing, not much of what they were pursuing in practice. And they really are, they are kind of the Mitt Romney party. And, you know, they still got a lot of votes, 47% of the vote exactly.
I know, that was so great when
know.
I finally reached for it. Yeah.
God is a numerologist. And kind of a dick, you know? Sorry. I want the Republican Party to be vital. You know, I want them to be
Right.
I want them to be working on policy. I think that the Sam Brownback, like Ken Cuccinelli theocratic stuff is going to end up being more important to their future than they want to imagine it's going to be.
Why do you say that? Because
It gives them a vision of what government should do. Because if you're just the interests of the wealthy, if you're just representing business interests, your policy agenda is small enough that if you don't get your way, there's really no reason for you to be around. And if we're going to have 4 more years of Obama and we're going to have sort of a center-left electorate and the country's going to keep going that direction, they're going to have to stand for something other than these economic policies that they're not going to get.
right.
Especially because the storytelling around why we need those economic policies isn't very good storytelling. It's just not very engaging. Rich people need more money. I've heard this. They need something else to talk about. And so then you get like Sam Brownback in Kansas. He closed there's no arts commission in Kansas. This is the first state that's ever gotten rid of it. But they have hired people to start, as the work of state government, persuading unmarried couples to get married. I mean, go for it. I mean, that's a different idea. Okay, go for it. Let's fight about it.
Right. Although, you know, in a way, that seems like that would, if that really became their stock in trade, there's the sort of line they were peddling. I mean, really, shouldn't a conservative party basically be fighting with the progressive or the right party should be fighting with the left party about the pace of change? I mean, in a way, it should be all about rhythm, right? I mean, it should be about, conservatives should be interested in conserving what works while not disallowing for the possibility that there are some things that need to be altered, whereas liberals and radicals should be interested in a faster, more revolutionary pace of transformation. And the ideal thing would be that we all agree that government is a good thing and you need taxation to have civilization and so on, and that we agree with the idea that church and state should be separate, and that we do battle over whether or not you can change quickly or change slowly, and who pays the price for the speed of change. And so, I mean, I don't know, that seems to me like a reasonable thing we do need, more than one party in this country, and it would be a reasonable thing for the...
Although, I think that's the other part of why I'm not that comfortable with progressive, because I don't feel like even though you would think that the right would be fighting to be conservative and conserve what we've got, and the left would be fighting to progress and move forward, I sort of feel like it's the opposite. I feel like the sort of civilization tuning achievements that we have as part of the New Deal and the welfare state are what the left is trying to hold on to, and the right is trying to sort of radically re-engineer a different, not to go back to an older way of doing things, but to move forward into a society that is post-New Deal, that is post-welfare state, and that is something that hasn't really been tried before. They have a more radical vision, I think, especially if they see the role of government as making people get married. I mean, that's a weird idea. Like, liberals wouldn't do that, but Sam Brownback wants to do that. And so I don't know where they're going. I wanted to know from you if you feel like there is a Republican in the country, a contender, somebody who's in the mix that gives you hope for that party. Is there somebody who you feel like?
God.
Lincoln's not a contender.
Lincoln.
Different party. Different time.
It's been a very interesting thing to have written something that suddenly Newt Gingrich, Rupert Murdoch, David Brooks, and Ross Douthat like. I'm struggling a lot with them.
Tell yourself they're being sarcastic.
They were just kidding. I missed the irony. Well, no, I mean, obviously they're clinging to Lincoln. They have to because, they don't have a lot else to sort of turn to. I'm really fascinated by the fact that they never, ever mention Eisenhower, who actually was someone that I guess maybe, I don't know why. I don't quite understand it. He was a war hero, a genuine war hero, and in some ways a horrible man, and in other ways a kind of okay president. I mean, at least compared to every other Republican president since. He was like, Christ. So and he's never, I know why they don't mention Nixon. I know why they'll never mention W again, but they never, ever mention Eisenhower. Anyway.
I like Eisenhower.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Except for the Rosenbergs. That was bad.
But his vision, that was bad. His vision of government being a useful thing and his political sort of technocratic capacity to turn, I want to build the interstate highway system, and so I'll tell people it's an evacuation system for our inevitable nuclear war. That was a smart way to do it.
Yes.
You can build anything if you tell people it's about that.
Right.
That was a good move.
Yes, and of course he finally, when he left, said, by the way, watch out for the Pentagon. It's going to destroy the Republic. Maybe that was what I don't know. They have abandoned him completely. But, so I'm trying to think, is there a Republican that gives me any hope? I'm sure there are. I'm not a very good, sort of collector of names of decent Republicans person.
Do you like John Huntsman?
Yeah, but people like Huntsman, or Olympia Snow or Susan Collins, you think, okay, why are you a Republican? It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. I can understand why you would have been an Eisenhower Republican, but I don't have any idea why you would want to have an affiliation with a party that espouses the insanity that this party, and it's doing the damage this party has done. It just doesn't it makes no sense, especially since, as you say, there's no court more activist than the Rehnquist court was, or, Roberts may be putting the brakes on that now, but there's certainly no justice in the history of the Supreme Court more interfering and, activist than Scalia. They're notoriously spendthrift and crazy with deficits. I love deficit spending, but they're
the experts.
Even for me, Republicans are completely out of control when it gets to the economy, and they're, so there's a radicalism in the party of dismantling of some of the fundamental tenets of civilization that's, really sort of shocking to behold. It's, but it's I guess what one of the things I think I was trying to get at with the question was, I came on stage not feeling nervous at all, and then the minute I started talking, I thought, God, I'm a playwright. What am I doing here with you? It's like, you actually know something? I'm like, you're way too young. Does anybody here, Oscar will remember this, the San Francisco Mime Troupe had this play. Yeah, really. Joan Holden and all these great people. And they had this brilliant play. It was one of the last things they did about this guy. He was a member of the Panthers, and then as the 60s faded into the 70s, and then Nixon, and then Watergate, and then Reagan, he becomes more and more despairing and disillusioned. He starts drinking heavily, and he becomes a street guy and a drunk. And he's a wino, and he's wandering around the back alleys in San Francisco, and he finds a trash can. He looks for empties, and he tries to drain out the bottoms of the empties, and he finds a wine bottle, and he tries to drain it, and has a genie inside. And the genie says, you can have any wish you want, and he says, I want to know the answers to all the lies that Republicans and people like Buckley at that point were saying. And the genie says, you can do that. So he becomes a superhero called the Fact Wino, which is the name of the... And we all loved that because there was this great cultural need at that point. These guys, Stockton and all these people were getting up and saying these outrageous things, and you sort of knew that they were lies, but most of us didn't have the answers. And I always think of you as the real life fact. You're like, you sort of showed up and you had solid information, and it was unanswerable, solid. It was like, okay, this is actually what the reality-based community is based on. This is real. You can prove these things, although you have to be you to do it. So anyway,
thank you. Also, I'm a good drinker, so that's nice. Well, I I
You
feel
tend
like
the bar at the. I read that you tend the bar at the Washington correspondence thing.
That's a different kind of nervous. You know, I think it's weird that there's a party where the journalists and the politicians are supposed to like hang out and schmooze. I think that's a weird thing. But it's expected that you're, like, if you get invited, you have to go, at least at my company. And so I told my boss that I would go, but only if I had a job, because I won't go to the dinner at all. But we host a party afterwards, and all the politicians come, and I don't want to make small talk with people who I have to then say mean things about on TV. And so I told them that I would, if I could work and there could be a thing between me and the people, that I would do it. And so now it's become this regular thing that I always tend bar at the after party for the correspondence dinner. So like Scott Brown won't talk to me, but I know what he drinks. I gave Sarah Palin a Diet Coke with lemon. It was nice.
He's probably drinking a lot of it these days.
He has time to.
Yes.
God bless him.
God.
I mean, I feel like, you know, the explanatory work that I try to do on TV, your expression of gratitude about that is very moving. And when I meet people who like the show, people will often explain to me that it's not that I'm saying, you're saying what I think, or you're expressing how I feel. It's that you are proving something that I knew to be true. And it's that it is, well, thank you. But that process of proving it, of showing your work, of like, here's where it came from and let me show you where it came from and here's how you can look it up yourself, I feel like is helpful for people to have better discussions. And it's a weird thing because I don't have very many discussions on my show. I talk for 17 minutes at a time. And then we go to commercial, and then we come back, and somebody has to, like, some poor bedraggled guest has to, walk through what I just explained for 17 minutes at a time. But I don't think of myself as a very good interviewer. I'm certainly not a very comprehensive interviewer. I am an explainer of things that then I want other people to talk about. And I think you do that. You, especially when you are overtly, when you are being overtly political, when you are in your screenwriting and in your plays, when you are explaining political processes, you are very rarely telling people how to feel about those processes. You're showing people how they work. I wondered if you thought of it that way.
Well, I think that's true of Lincoln, certainly. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really proud of in that. I don't really know what I do. I mean, playwriting is a weird thing, and it's, I saw the Richard Nelson's play, Sorry, which is closing tonight. Really great writer and a beautiful production. And Mark and I were leaving to go back home before I came back here, and a young guy in the lobby said, "Oh, there are no tickets left. I want to, see you and Rachel do a mashup." I don't even know what that means. It sounded
I think we're doing it. Sounds great.
Terrifying, but he said this is going to be at the intersection of politics and theater, and I get asked about that a lot. But it's in a way we're sort of talking to one another across a very, very wide gulf, because I feel in a way that there's a kind of a fundamental irresponsibility in playwriting. It's the strength of playwriting comes from that irresponsibility, and the power of theater, which is a sort of an indirect power. It's not. It's an indirect way of participating in the world. So it feels like it's a very different thing. I think I have a very deep responsibility as a writer to try really hard not to lie, and to try not to distort history if I'm using history in my work. And in a way, that's exactly the same. It would be terrible for a journalist to stand up and say, this and this and this and all of that to be untrue. But the facts that I use, if the thing is working as a work of art, are in a certain sense sort of almost ancillary to what's ultimately going to be. Richard's play today is set on in November 2nd or whatever it was, 2012, on the day of the election. But it's also about an old actor losing his memory. and it swirls around the election. And the last line, which is quite beautiful, which is "I'll vote later," has a resonance because there's a whole sort of there's a generality and a vagueness and an openness, which is very, very different than, God, I'm just all over the place right now. But
I'm with you.
You know what? Am I making any sense at all? Or
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think it's a different relationship to facts. My gratitude comes from the fact that, I think everybody feels that, and I think if you're a progressive person, you should always keep before you the possibility that you might be wrong. You have to keep alive dialectic. You have to be willing to look at things from both sides. I think that I would like to believe that for people who are genuinely progressive, radical, liberal, that we're constantly asking questions, that the answer, and that we're not afraid that asking questions is going to deprive us of the power to act. On the opposite, I think that it's something that Hannah Arendt said in Eichmann in Jerusalem, that sort of one of the fundamentals of political reactionary thinking is a thought process that stops making causal connections when they get uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and a failure to ask those kind of questions. So I don't know where I was going with that, but
the insistence on not just accuracy, but insistence on relating things to the factual world has become a political insistence. And that, to me, is why I am excited about these election results, because even though all politicians lie, to have built a political convention around that literally had tacked up on the walls of the convention hall, "We built this," as a rebuttal to an out-of-context statement made by the president that wasn't actually at all what they thought that he meant. To have built a convention physically around that idea, to have had a whole run of 5 different consecutive ads from a presidential campaign saying that President Obama was taking the work requirement out of welfare when he was not doing that. It's one thing to fight about welfare. It's another thing to make up something entirely to run against. The failure of that is exciting.
yes.
I'm glad that lost.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the, since McCarthy, it's the big lie. If you repeat it over, we built this, and it's this big lie. You could hear Karl Rove telling the gulls that he was bilking $600 million out of. We'll just keep repeating these lies, and eventually they become the truth. And it didn't work, and it fell flat. You could feel it falling flat. It was working for the deep converts, but it was basically not gaining any traction at all. And they just decided that it was, even though it was clear to everybody else that it wasn't. So.
And what would it be like if if the media pointed and laughed when people made stuff up?
Right.
Wouldn't that be awesome? I think that sort of started to happen.
Well, and exactly, and I think because of people like you, it did start to happen. There were, even debates in the New York Times about this old habit of the media of saying, President Obama says that the grass is underneath your feet and the sky is above, and Mitt Romney says the grass is growing out of the top of your hair and you're standing, on Swiss cheese. They both have a point of view, and and then we'll leave it at that, and you decide. That there was an impatience with this kind of peculiar idea of good journalism, that if somebody is lying, if somebody's saying there's widespread voter fraud and there isn't, maybe don't help them by promulgating that idea and then not following up by saying, by the way, this person is completely and totally full of shit.
Yeah.
And I think that started to happen, and I think that, I really feel that, I don't know, this is going to be like a giant suck-up session, but, it's like, but I do feel that you can't, a kind of perfect storm of people, of a couple of genius comedians, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, and then you, are beginning to transform the way that journal, and also the fact that all newspapers are running out of money and disappearing, and
So they need to do something.
We just got a copy of Newsweek with a cover that said, "Now is the perfect time to subscribe to Newsweek." It's like, well, because if you don't, you can't do it in 2 weeks because it won't exist anymore. So, which is actually a horrible, terrible thing that that's happening. But I mean, what Newsweek used to be at any rate. Can I go back to my first little thing though? Even if I just made it up in my own head, the idea that there's an attempt in the coining of the word progressive to find some sort of common ground between liberal and radical, I think maybe that's what I was trying to get at. Because I've been very, very disturbed and at times very angry with the response of the left, I consider myself a person of the left, to the Obama administration. And as somebody who has thought about, you know, like all good sort of paranoid lefty and Jewish type people, I mean, I think a lot about the Weimar Republic and the collapse of the progressive community in Germany, the radical and more centrist and liberal factions in Germany to come to common cause and oppose the Nazis. It seems to me that the building of a community of politically effective progressive people in this country is of paramount importance, not just to the country, but to the whole planet now. So I kind of wanted to ask you about that, I guess, and I have, I think, maybe even a specific question. You know, I was watching you when you were reporting on, it was during the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, and the Obama administration started granting offshore deepwater, and you were mad about it.
Yeah.
And very
Still mad about it. Yeah.
But so just using that as an example, and there are so many other examples that one could use. I'm interested in this question. I mean, Oscar and I have had lots of fights about this, arguments about this. I found myself from the time that Obama got elected to now interested only in one thing, that he get reelected, that we get the House back, that we start to build, you know, rebuild the Great Society, rebuild the New Deal, get back what we've lost so that we can then go forward into an even better future. I'm enormously impatient with the powerlessness of the left. I think it's been catastrophic for this country. So how do we talk about, how do we perform our function as people who are obligated to criticize and point out, you know, and keep a healthy public discussion going about policy, while at the same time, since we are in a democracy, making sure that we're not going to undermine the electability of compromise, but still decent, progressive, sane people, so that we don't wind up with a Romney-Ryan administration or a Palin-McCain, you know. I mean, how do we do that?
I think about it all the time, and I think it's hard because there is a way to do it, but the way to do it involves complexity. And so, I mean, I think of it as, how do you be constructive? And in the bigger and more boring part of it is keep talking about the other side. Don't ever forget that there are Republicans and there is a right, and there is, when you are talking about the left, even when you are airing dirty laundry on the left, never let anybody forget that this is but one part of the American dichotomous, right, situation that we've got with the two parties. So that's the more boring part of it. The more interesting part of it, which I think has a lot to do with emotional intelligence, is to deny cynicism, any sort of toehold in your criticism. And so when I had Michael Bromwich on the air talking about giving those leases, I was trying not, the reason I got angry with him, and I actually got mad at him during the interview, which is not something that happens to me very often, is because I felt like he wasn't taking it seriously. He wasn't taking the fact that I was interviewing him seriously, and he was not taking the idea that there could be any legitimate criticism and constructive criticism of what he was doing seriously. He was seeing me as somebody who was trying to tear him down, and he was there to not be torn down, because it was a process thing for him. It wasn't substantive. I feel like the reason that I am on the American political left in this year, in this era, is because I believe government can do useful stuff and must. Therefore, I need to not be cynical about whether or not government can do useful stuff. You can't be flip about it. And so here's an example. The Veterans Administration. What's happening right now is that all of the 2.5 million Americans who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan are no longer fighting in Iraq and are starting to wind down fighting in Afghanistan, and we have a lot of veterans, and they served really long tours, and it was a very small proportion of the country fighting for a very long time, and the signature wound of these wars is traumatic brain injury, which has all sort of subtle manifestations, and we make lifelong healthcare, comprehensive healthcare promises to these people who do it. They're coming back and they're filing disability claims, and they're just stacking up. I mean, we did a short segment once that I made short because I was not going to be able to talk about it for any longer without crying, which was about a VA office, I think it was in Texas, where the files, the physical paper files, which were disability applications, disability benefits applications, were stacked to the ceiling on like floor 5 of this office building, and there were so many of them that it had rendered the building structurally unsound. And it's getting worse. The length of time that it takes to get those disability benefits applications processed now averages about a year. You have to, a year before you hear. And the length of the wait time got 40% worse in the last year. And so I am morally outraged by the fact that my country is behaving this way toward these people of whom we ask so much when we ask nothing of the rest of us. And I have to be able to cover that in a way that is about getting better. That can't be, we can't do this, we should never have made those promises, government sucks, Obama sucks, Democrats and Republicans are all the same. You can't let it be that way. It has to be, I try to end my segments whenever we talk about this with say what it is that you need, because we as a country are morally compelled to provide it to you. Say it, name your price, we will do it. This needs to be done. Do you need this to be taken over by somebody in the private sector? Do you need this to be taken over by a Republican who I hate? Do you need this to be done? There has to be some practical solution to this that I might ideologically not be able to stand, but there has to be a way to fix it. Let us fix it. Trying to be overtly constructive and not give in to the idea that it always sucks. And I feel like the criticism of Obama from the left that I can't take, that I find enraging, is I think of it as the Nader stuff, right? Is the like, oh, they're all the same, the parties are a two-headed hydra. Nope, it's not true. They're very, very different, and therefore we need to demand and expect the best of this guy in the White House and his administration, because this is pretty much as good as it gets, so let's make it work, right?
I mean, well said, and I agree with everything you say. What scares me though is that I mean, there are all sorts of ways that one could look at this. You know, the anarchism of the right, what they call libertarianism, but which is, they used to call it ego anarchism in the late 19th century. It's an absolutely atomized idea of society. There's the anarcho-communists like Goldman believed in connections between people that was a sort of a natural law that people would follow through affinity and love, and that would make social coherence possible. And then there were ego anarchists who really believed that it should all just be people carrying guns and shooting each other. And there were now would be called Republicans. Well, they are called Republicans. So but this whole thing, I think David DeLeon once said that the Native American radical tradition is anarchism, not communism, and that deep ingrained libertarian anarchist streak is something that the right shares with the left. And some of the most extraordinary forces that came out of the 60s revolution were, were fundamentally, anarchist in nature. And the right borrowed from their playbook, and they continued to use their playbook. So there's a way in which left criticism of Obama, of the Obama administration, of politics in general, speaks very, very powerfully in exactly the way that you were ascribing to, sort of the Naderites in 2000. It's like it's all, what Gore Vidal said, it's all owned by the same studio. It's all one system, and there's no real difference between the two. You had said earlier, I mean, 47% voted for Romney, which is kind of, stunning given how few of those people were in any way their interests were in no way represented by this man. In fact, he was what he believed was inimical to their best interest. So is there do you feel that there's a need to, I don't have a question at the end of this. I guess I was really sort of just saying it. My fear is that we come perilously close to undoing ourselves constantly by things that start out as legitimate critiques that get carried away. The LGBT community's, I think, rather shameful record of response to Obama's, I think, rather brilliant way of handling this issue, from getting himself elected as the first African-American president and getting reelected, and before then announcing that he believed in same-sex marriage, but the sort of horror and outrage, and that's it, he's worse than Bush when he says he's evolving. It's sort of no one with any sense of human psychology or human behavior or reality could possibly have believed that Barack Obama didn't believe in couldn't make the difference between religious and secular marriage. But the whole LGBT community, which is a very smart bunch of people, rose up in outrage every time he refused to say.
And I was that way on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was absolute, I don't think I was outraged. I was inappropriately emotive, let's say it that way, about the fact that he wasn't just cramming Don't Ask, Don't Tell through. Like, I just refused to believe that guy was smarter than me about political process, right? Well, guess who's never run for anything?
Yes.
Right. And my inability to see his political strategy at work on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to the point where I think I actually embarrassed myself in terms of how I was presuming it ought to go and pushing that it ought to go. I didn't have the same feeling on the marriage issue, just because I don't think that issue motivates me as much. But I see that also reflected, and it's embarrassing.
I mean, and with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was even, we got rid of it. He helped us get rid of it. Congress got rid of it during the lame duck session when he was being assailed by everyone on the left and the liberal left and the centrist left for giving the Republicans in Congress the Bush tax cuts.
Right.
And he even said, I mean, it was amazing to me how few people heard when he made his little speech saying, I'm going to let them have this. His language is kind of astonishing. He says it's a fetish with these guys. If you have to give them this, it's like some little doodad they have to play with. And if you try to take it away from them, they start making really unpleasant noises. So we're going to let them hang on to this thing. It's going to go away anyway. It's scheduled to disappear. So we're going to let them have this so that we don't hamstring Congress during this lame duck session. We can extend jobless benefits, and lo and behold, also, we got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
And got a million things. I mean, that lame duck session got a million things done. Right after, and the left infuriated the whole time, after the left had stayed home through the 2010 elections and not voted, and thus handed every state house in the country to the Republicans. It's embarrassing.
A huge catastrophe. I even actually feel, and Frank Bruni in the Times today has a thing sort of saying, why hasn't Bill Clinton apologized for DOMA? Like, with all the things in the world, and with a rather extraordinary heroic job Bill Clinton did campaigning for Obama, it's really okay with me that he's not, crawling around begging out. It's really all right. But I actually think that in a democracy, things like Don't Ask, Don't Tell and DOMA are good, because when you create this politically, this constitutionally indigestible thing, when you get it onto the law books, when it's not just understood as policy, that's creating the space in a democracy for an actual legal battle to begin.
I agree. It's an irritant. It's a useful irritant.
And right, and that's exactly what it took 17 years, and it's shocking that it took so long, but if Al Gore well, he did win in 2000 if he had actually managed to, get into the White House instead of, the Vance, it would have been, I think, gone a lot earlier. Yeah. So, but I think that there's something, some of those compromises, I mean, I think people forget the heroism of Clinton. I mean, maybe not as remotely as politically savvy as Obama, but Obama had Clinton to learn from. The very first thing that Bill Clinton did wasn't even health care. It was saying we're going to have gays serving in the military, and he was completely stabbed in the back by lots of elderly Democratic senators and the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff. But he didn't just say, okay, fine, let's drop the whole thing. He left this snarl of just, transparently, blatantly unfair policy for everybody to kind of, cringe. And there's been a long succession of presidents, including Poppy Bush, saying this is really not very, nice for us to fight over. And so I don't know. I feel like it's sort of advanced.
The problem is, though, is that it upped the number of people who were getting kicked out. More people got kicked out of the military for being gay under Don't Ask, Don't Tell than under the previous just straight out ban.
Right.
So that was weird.
Well, and that's a good point. And that's true.
I feel like Clinton. It is strange that so many of the historic advances of the Obama administration will be getting rid of things that Bill Clinton left behind. Right? That is a little, it's a little, like DOMA was a Clinton thing and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a Clinton thing. And, but to see the embrace, the overt and ecstatic embrace of Obama during this campaign by Clinton, I felt like, I sort of feel like you do. Like, I don't really want to see anybody apologize. Like, these guys are pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely.
It's a useful thing. And the country would elect Clinton now if he was going to, either Clinton. After Obama in 2016, the country would elect either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always think about Clinton in I guess the 2000 Democratic Convention when he's done, and he was the speaker, I think, the night before Gore was, and he made like one of the great speeches of his life, where he laid out really a history of the United States from the Great Depression to the Reagan Revolution, counter-revolution, and you really saw that you sort of knew it anyway. You knew that after Oklahoma, at least, that he got it, that he got what had happened to this country and where we had gone and where we needed to go. And it always felt to me like that was this moment of him articulating, although he hadn't acted on it in many ways, a sense of what we need to build and where we need to go to. And we just had to wait 8 really horrendous years until we could resume the... Somebody tweeted on the night that he gave his speech, Bill Clinton has just done a far better job than Barack Obama at explaining why Barack Obama is far better president than Bill Clinton.
I feel like, when I first started working at MSNBC, they used to put me on TV with Pat Buchanan all the time.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah. And I personally get along with Pat really well. He doesn't work at MSNBC anymore. But there was a moment at the Denver convention when Obama was being nominated when Pat and I were sitting next to each other on this big open air stage. It was great because there was the 9/11 truther guys who were like set up. They figured out all the camera angles. And so they were set up right behind us at our open air stage. And so we had camera guys like holding cameras hanging from the rigging so as to keep the 9/11 was an inside job banner out of every shot. It was a really fun time. It was very strange. But I was sitting there next to Pat, and somebody brought up the Houston Republican Convention from 1992, where he gave his big, horrible culture war speech. And I said to Pat, listen, I was, however old I was then, I was 19 or whatever when that happened, and you scared the shit out of me. Like, you giving that speech and seeing that crowd react to you that way at a place where the President of the United States was being nominated, I felt like I didn't have a country, or that part of my country had declared war on me. And it was like, hey, Pat, you made me cry. And I've been thinking about Pat since recently, because I miss the opportunity to have confrontational conversations like that with people who then have to talk back. And I miss that because Republicans won't come on MSNBC anymore. At least they won't talk to me anymore.
What did he say when you said that?
He didn't apologize or anything like that. He just explained his argument again. He still believes it.
You know what Molly Ivan said about it? She said, after he gave the speech, she said, "I'm sure it sounded much better in the original German." I remember that. I was actually in a hotel room. It's like one of my favorite things. I was in a hotel room in Los Angeles working on Angels in America. We were about to open the play of the first time we were doing both parts at the Mark Taper Forum. And I was working on the play, I forget what I was working on at the moment, while the convention was going on, and I was listening to him. And I had this really strong feeling, and I'll never forget it. This isn't working. I mean, it was clearly working in the room. They were just eating it up. But I had this and I felt it again with the Republican debates when they started sounding really, but everybody was sort of getting it then. But in '92, I thought the time for this rhetoric is a little bit past its,
This would work in 1989. This is not going to work in 1992.
Yeah, that things had changed. The AIDS epidemic, that there was the cross-dressing, the biggest display of ideological cross-dressing. And it was like got a big guffaw, but the meanness of it and the cruelty of it. And I thought, oh, this is it. I didn't know how to explain it, but I just had this deep feeling, he's miscalculated. This isn't going to really work.
See, I felt like, oh, they're going to win, and then I'm going to have to move. I'm going to need a new country. I mean, because at that point, in 1992, protease inhibitors in 1996, I was in ACT UP from the time I was, 17. I knew a lot of dead people before I was 20. And here's my country picking who I'm assuming is going to be the next president, and didn't end up working out that way. And I just thought, well, this is it. We've come to a fork in the road, and the fork is in us. That's what it felt like to me. And maybe it's because I was 19. Maybe it's because it didn't. Yeah. But I was legit scared. I'm so glad that you knew it wasn't going to work. But the other reason I've been thinking about Pat is because Pat's later thesis, what he ended up writing all his books about, his last few books, were about how white America was going away, and that white America should take overt steps to make America white again. I mean, it's creepy, right? Creepy argument. And I just wondered, with the demographic diagnosis of these election results, Romney won white people. John McCain won white people. But guess what? You can't win the presidency with white people. I wonder, now that tipping point has been reached and we are down the other side of that slope, what happens to really far-right politics, right? What happens to people who worry that if America isn't white, then America isn't America? Are we in for a renewed right radicalism, or are they going to,
I think that's a very, I don't know none of us know the answer to that. I've been saying for a while since the film came out that, it's not just that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have completely switched places since the 1860s, but that, in a two-party system, both the reason that two-party system, the advantage of a two-party system as opposed to a multi-party parliamentary system is that you sacrifice a certain amount of dynamism where you have all these different little parties represented and coalitions being formed and breaking up. What you get in exchange for that is stability. And stability is something that shouldn't be sneezed at. America never really came close to fascism during the Great Depression. Pretty much every European country either came close to it and backed away or didn't back away. And the stability of the system might have had something to do with that. But for that to work, each of the two parties has to agree to be a big tent party that holds within itself all the little parties that, the left, right, and center. And in the secession crisis in 1860, the Democratic Party, which was the right, their moderates were gone, were sort of extirpated from the party, and it became entirely a party of rabid right extremists. There were some really psychotically rabid right, and then traitors basically, and then less. But the whole party became extreme, and the Republican Party was a multi-platform party, and we've traded places again. And it's the Civil War resolution is not one that we want to. People keep saying, asking journalists say when I'm being interviewed, isn't it too bad that we don't have a president who can unite the country the way that Abraham Lincoln did. And it's like, well, think about that for just a second, because it wasn't his fault, but it really wasn't, maybe there's another way to unite the country that doesn't involve 750,000 dead people. But it's, so I don't know what happens. I mean, that's going to be an interesting thing. Because when I asked you, if they get rid of the theocrats and the ego-anarchists and the plutocrats, what's left, and what we didn't mention is the racists, which is absolutely the coherence of the Tea Party. And I mean, is that what the party is? I mean, is that going to be, or is the Tea Party going to, become increasingly a party of some kind of like crazy white supremacist? Is that going to come more and more out of the closet?
Then what do they get? Like, if they did, what are they aiming at? I mean, unless they do secede, unless they do.
Idaho.
They get, okay.
Done. You can have it. Go.
We'll see ya. No, I find the right endlessly fascinating, and I have a hopeful fixation on them because I want the right to police its crazies. I enjoy the crazies. I mean, what else would I talk about? But they have to be talking about policy that could conceivably be the policy of the United States or America, or we are not having a debate. And if we're not having a debate, we're in trouble. So,
right. But I mean, the fiscal cliff that we're supposedly hurtling towards, it's the same thing as the country's credit rating. I mean, when you have an entire party that used to be, what everyone thought of it. I mean, the first person to stand up on the floor of the Senate and denounce McCarthy was a Republican. Yeah. Eisenhower said, I'm cutting him loose. I mean, he was undone, in the Senate by. There were principled Republicans during Watergate.
Sure.
We remember Rodino and people like that.
Buckley went after the Birchers. Right?
Yeah. So when you have the entire Republican Party, with not even Snow and Collins really being willing to break formation, willingly sort of pushing the country towards, absolute, I mean, to go back into recession because they're insisting that, I mean, that kind of madness, it's really hard to imagine them policing their crazies because, I mean, this is another Lincoln thing that he said at a couple of points that he's careful about it, but he says he prefers radicals to conservatives because the radicals have, as he said, their eyes are facing Zionwards. He found them huge pains in the ass, but they've got an ideal that they're aiming towards. He said that conservatives are more corruptible by secession because the only thing they really care about is power, and there isn't an ultimate goal besides the amassing of power and consequently wealth. So I don't know. It's hard to know what happens with that.
I'm very interested in national security and war and the fact that we've been at war for 12 years. And I will say I had a little glimmer. I think that John McCain is sort of over in the Republican Party, but John McCain's role in the Republican Party is that he is the person who has foreign policy, so they don't need to. Well, John has foreign policy; he does it, and it's not working out great. And so that's over. I think he's ending in that regard. And so, who's going to be the new foreign policy brain of the Republican Party? And several people who Republicans will talk to more than they will talk to me have told me that they think that Bob Corker might be their new foreign policy guy, which, okay, the guy who was the mayor of Chattanooga, sure, why not? But if that is true, and if I don't have a value judgment about whether or not that's true, but if that is the guy who's going to be that part of the Republican Party now, he voted for the amendment this week that said we should leave Afghanistan sooner than the end of 2014. Okay, you're going to be in charge? Let's talk about it. I feel like there are things happening, undercurrents that are happening that may be more constructive.
Yeah, I hope so.
Maybe.
I think Lindsey Graham, every time I see him talk, he gets gayer and gayer every day. So how much, it's any day now, he's going to say, oh, hell with it. I want you to meet my husband. We're going to live together for, so it's going to happen at some point, right? And then the whole world will be a better place.
Now, definitely no Republicans are going to talk to me. Can I ask you a Lincoln question?
Yeah.
Is it true that you wrote hundreds of pages more Lincoln-related script that was not specifically about the 13th Amendment?
Yeah, I wrote a 500-page script that's the last 4 months of his administration before his assassination, and we filmed the first quarter of it.
Are you going to make the rest of it into plays or movies or TV shows, please?
I'd like to maybe publish it at some point, although I'm not sure. Well, but I'm not sure that I want to. Thank you, person. Was that you, Oscar? Was that? Oscar has read. Well, Oscar reads everything I write. So Oscar, as I was literally as it was coming out of the printer, I was handing it to Oscar, and he said, as I thought when I was writing it, that the film was going to be the last month, which is Lincoln going down to City Point and Richmond, and which is so cinematic and dramatic. And Stephen, who is always surprising, said the thing I like best is this counting votes in the House of Representatives, and I liked it a lot. So we really just sort of cut off the back 3/4 of the script. The only thing is, I mean, I don't really ever want to see. I mean, I shouldn't say this. How's anybody going to top what Daniel Day-Lewis? I mean, I don't think that it's going to be really. I would never want to work with another actor playing Lincoln. I can't imagine it. I think that what he does is, you know, from the very first day of filming, it was like, oh my God, this is frightening. I mean, the guy, he looks like Lincoln, and he's one of the greatest actors that ever lived. And it's like, I just can't think.
I would go see the other part of the script, whether or not it had Daniel Day-Lewis in it. I mean, or if it did. I mean, I don't know.
I just can't imagine, you know, and I wouldn't want to do it without Stephen. I don't know. Who knows what will happen? Maybe we'll do like a computer-generated.
An anime version?
Right, we'll buy the copyright to Daniel's genes, and there'll be James Cameron will have some sort of computer that will, you know, make one. He'll be 8 feet tall and blue with a long tail, but I've been asked a lot recently what surprised you about Lincoln when you did the research, and I researched for so long, and there's so much that's completely jaw-dropping about him that I could never know how to answer that question. And I realized just a couple of days ago that probably the real answer is the inexhaustibility of the subject of Lincoln. That for some reason, for somebody who died in his mid-50s, who didn't leave an enormous amount of paperwork behind, but who was president during the Civil War, there never seems to be an end of controversy and really interesting questions to ask that are not just questions about his personality or his individual decisions, but really always speak to some of the most profound questions about the nature of democracy and human society. It's just it's like a Chekhov play or everything Shakespeare wrote. You can visit it and revisit it, and it never ceases to be new. And there aren't that many things in the world that are like that, and it's a miracle in a way.
The thing that I found like I couldn't shake off was the connection of his family life and his relationship with his wife to his leadership, and that idea of understanding his self-sacrifice and taking this chisel to your humanity in terms of dealing with the grief of his son, and how that just makes you respect his decision to be a public person for the country and what it took for him to do to himself privately in order to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I found devastating. It's very hard to.
Well, I'm thrilled that you got that, because I think she's so much abused as a figure and misunderstood, and I think she was a great and important woman and a brilliant woman. I mean, she was a little nuts, but so was he, honestly, and so are most interesting people. And she was, I think not an easy spouse. But one of the things that is lost by just doing this one section is, he really did go to her late at night. He stopped allowing her to consult with him directly. What we show in the film, she was sort of cut out because she wasn't entirely trustworthy. She sold his first annual message to Congress, which was what they called the State of the Union address. She sold it to a newspaper to raise money to buy things for the White House. I mean, I think that people misunderstand that. She liked shopping and she liked clothes, but you know, they did when they entered the White House. It was a ruins. It was a disgusting pigsty, and which is surprising because the guy before Lincoln was a gay man, Buchanan, and he had let it fall to ruin. So, go figure. We think he was gay. We don't know, and he wasn't very attractive, but he was. So all I mean by that is I haven't had many fantasies about him.
Horrible housekeeper and not that cute. Done. But, you know, she was the daughter of a very, very powerful, very sophisticated Kentucky political family. She was proposed to by marriage by all three men who ran for president in 1860. She was a serious person, and she really understood political theater. And she knew, arriving in the White House, since the country had completely disintegrated before they arrived, and there was literally, when they arrived in Washington, there was no federal government. They had to reassemble it before it completely evaporated. She set about, with no budget at all, making that place into a palace expressive of immense federal power. And people who came from all over the world, it was very important to impress the French. You know, you can't do that with dirty carpets. Everybody who came had to be, you know, receive the impression that the United States government was a powerful, coherent thing, and she had a lot to do with that. But he did go to her every night, or many nights, and tell her these nightmares and dreams that he had, and she would have migraines and freakouts and go to mediums and become, you know, devastated by the things he was telling her. You really get the feeling that this man handed her these packets of distress and terror, because think of the pressures on him, and she would take them and do the work of letting them drive you crazy.
Letting them drive you crazy. And I think one knows of such relationships, and I think that the Lincolns, when they were going down to, I'll stop, I've become what I call a Lincoln logoriac. I can't.
We don't want you to stop.
I can't shut up. And then another one, I just, the best thing. No, but when they were leaving on March 18th of '65, they left at Grant's invitation to sail down to City Point, which is when he went and he stayed for the longest stretch of time out of Washington during the entire war, and he was there for the end of the war. It's an amazing thing. They left in a hurricane, what was described as a hurricane. I don't know if it was really a hurricane, but this terrible storm. She had a brain injury from an accident a couple of years before. She had terrible seasickness, and they were on this boat, and she was physically just dying. She insisted on going with him. And he woke her up on the first night in the middle of this storm and said, I've just had a dream that you and Tad were in the White House and it was burning to the ground, and I was outside and I couldn't get you out. And I had to stand outside and watch while the whole thing burned to the ground. And then, you know, have a nice night. And he left the cabin. And she went nuts. But so there's a very complicated dynamic going on in that relationship, is all I'm saying, and I think you just put it beautifully, so I'll shut up now.
Well, no, keep going. When Susan and I saw it together, and as we were leaving, we didn't talk for a very long time. And the first thing that Susan said when we allowed ourselves to start talking about the film was she referenced, you know, I don't find it hard to believe that first ladies believe in the occult. And that a lot of different first ladies have believed in the occult, and it's a joke, you know, it's the Nancy Reagan astrologer and all the rest of it and all this thing, but it's not a weird thing. If you think about the occult as a way to understand power beyond what is knowable power, well, if you're attached to the most powerful man in the country and you see him buffeted by things that he can't seem to control, what do you believe is controlling him?
Right.
Yeah.
And I found one of her mediums, this woman named Nettie Colburn, who lived in Georgetown. I mean, many of the women mediums in Washington were suffragists and abolitionists. So there was a political thing going on there too. I'm sure when those women went to Nettie Colburn's house and they talked, they weren't just talking about the afterlife, they were talking politics. And the National Convention of Spiritualists and Transists, there's some weird, the National Association of Mediums had a convention in late summer of 1864, and delivered the message to the Chicago Tribune that the afterlife had endorsed Lincoln as president. I'm sure they did.
I think about the medium suffragette Lincoln endorsers. Don't you think they were, ladies? I'm just saying. I don't know.
No,
You don't know it?
No, you have to. You mean like gay? Maybe some of them were. I don't know.
That just seems wicked gay to me.
Being a medium?
Well, being a medium, like and needing to have a convention, like what you guys just don't know. You don't know what each other's thinking, right? Getting like all the ladies who are all suffragettes and radicals.
Yeah, well, I'm sure,
and,
yes, of course.
Yeah.
No, listen, and I mean, undoubtedly.
No, I'm embarrassed.
I'm sure there were a huge number of, like in the suffragists. I mean, there were among the early women organizers of suffrage and abolition, there were a disproportionate to their percentage of the population number of gay women. I mean, it was,
That's what we do. That's what we're like.
Get things done.
Yeah. Do you listen to music when you write?
That's why I wish I was a painter, because I really envy that. I would love to do it. I know only of a couple. I think Edmund White actually listens to music when he writes. But most writers that I know are like me. And I grew up in a house full of music because my parents were both musicians.
Yeah.
But if I'm trying to hear the rhythm of something that I'm doing, I can't have I can sit in a coffee shop and I love the sound of babble and like terrible noise. I love riding on the subway. That's a very good place if I can sit down. But if there's music playing, I can't. Do you write with music on? I mean, when you?
No, and I wish that I did. I'm very music oriented, and I can't do it. I can do lots of other work, but I can't create. I can't write, and I can't.
Why do you think that is?
What's that?
Why do you think that is?
I just don't think I'm smart enough. Like I don't think my brain. I have a one-lane brain, so it's got, if it has traffic in it, that's the only traffic. Like there's no passing, so I can't do two things at once.
I don't think that has to do with the level of intelligence. I mean, I think that there's a ferocity of concentration that's necessary to think really hard, and music is a seduction from another world. It's not rational, it's not linear in that sense, and I think it has a pull. It's partly rhythmic, but it's also melodic and harmonic. It pulls you into a place where thought isn't, where you're not thinking the way that we think when we put together words. It's just a different part of the brain, I guess.
Which is why it's so important.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about video games?
That would be a perfect segue for you to sing.
That number that we worked on.
Our number. Do I what?
I've been thinking about video games. I have poor thumb control. I can't do it. But I was just, as a playwright and a screenwriter, and somebody who has an ambitious expectation for the number of words people can absorb in a row.
Says Rachel Maddow. I mean, when the first time I heard you on television, it's like, oh my God, listen to how much she's saying in one, I thought, great, this is, so.
But wait,
video, you mean video? I'm needlepointing. Is that like that?
Are you really?
Yeah.
Why?
I've actually ruined my hand with it. Have you ever needlepointed?
No.
I would say try it, except it really will give you carpal tunnel syndrome.
It's just a form of stitching?
It's, oh no, I'll tell you about it. I don't know, maybe it's like some sort of like atavistic thing from my, shtetl ancestors who were, one of them was an embroiderer for the Russian Navy, so maybe it's that. But there's something incredibly soothing about it. It's just, and it's not art, you make nice things, pillows, and well, we all need pillows, right? I don't know. It's needlepointing has changed my life.
So I hate.
We're talking about needlepointing.
I know. It's the worst.
I know. So,
Do you play video games?
I want to learn to play video games. I feel like, hold on, one second.
Go ahead.
I feel like the thing about video games now is that video games are a way of making miniature movies within a circumscribed plot area. And I was reading this week about how there's this sort of new idea. There's an idea in video games now that when you die, you should really be dead. That you don't just die. It's a first-person shooter. There's other people shooting at you or whatever, and then you get shot. Okay, would you like to continue? Oh, you reconstitute. That's the way that I think about video games. But these games go on for multi-sessions, and you build a character, and your character grows in its skill and experience, and you get new attributes that help you do whatever you're going to do. But then when you die, it's called permadeath in video gaming, and the idea would be that you play more conservatively and you behave in a more rational way, because when your character dies, you never get that character back, and you have to start with you have to start as a baby. You have to start as a new person. And
Well, you do if you're playing a Hindu video game, but if you're playing like a Christian video game, you go to hell or heaven, and if you're playing a Jewish video game, a bunch of Talmudists argue about what's going to happen to you. But, yeah.
I will be subjected to permadeath.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. We just have time for a couple of questions, short questions. Then we all have to go
we went
home.
over. I'm sorry.
I'm
It's my fault.
Please, I'm glad. So the 2 ground rules of the public forum: no opening statements and no follow-ups. We want to make sure that we can hear from a couple people in the small amount of time that we have. Wait for a microphone to find you, please. Nate.
Hi. You mentioned the gulf between journalism and theater, and I think I've noted that when things come from a journalism perspective and enter that gulf, like a Jon Stewart or a Stephen Colbert, they're accepted and that's okay. But when things come from theater and sort of move towards journalism, like, not to bring up a sore subject, but Mike Daisy and The Agony and the Ecstasy of Steve Jobs, they're rejected. Do you think that's fair? And how do you guys deal with the temptation to enter that gulf to be more compelling or get things across more clearly?
I mean, not to stick my finger into the sore that you just opened, but I mean, I don't think that there's a rejection of a kind of journalistic theater. There are a lot of people Anna Devere Smith and Mike Daisy and the Tricycle Theater who use journalistic techniques, but a journalist who makes up stories or details is going to get in trouble in the same way that a theater artist who's working as you have to adhere to a journalistic standard. If what you're saying is my piece has power because it's absolutely true, it's not fiction, it's reportage, then you're telling your audience, believe this, and then you can't say, well, except, oh, it's theater, so you don't have to believe it. I mean, I think you can't play fancy with that. You have to, it's not historical fiction if it's docudrama. There's whatever that means. I don't know.
No, I think that's right. I think that it is instructive that the Daily Show is very, very, very rigorously fact-checked. And I've talked to Jon Stewart about that, and he's basically says, I still want to be thought of as a guy who does fake news, but nothing is funny. Nothing makes something unfunny faster than figuring out that a fact was wrong in the setup for the joke. So it behooves you to be right if you're going to try to seem like you're being right.
Yeah, I mean, my little for making historical fiction is that we get to play around with what happens on the way to what happened. That if you ask, did this actually happen, and the answer is yes, then the thing that you're talking about is, in some sense, history. Did it happen, as far as we are able to ascertain, using the best research that we have access to, exactly this way? If the answer to that is yes, then it's nonfiction history. If the answer is, well, it happened, but not exactly this way, then it's historical fiction. And the main thing for me is that you never change. Like if I had said in Lincoln that the 13th Amendment passed by 2 votes, and it actually passed by 150 votes, and there was no suspense, that would be bad because it actually is changing the meaning of the history that we're dramatizing. So I don't know if that answers it. But it did actually only pass by 2 of them.
Okay, so Rachel and I'm up here in the back. Hey guys. Rachel and Tony, thank you so much for tonight and for not being nervous. We really appreciate your sharing. So here's the question. I'm trying to figure out something for both of you. So Rachel, this week's guest on the interview is President Lincoln. What would you ask him? And then Tony, what would you want her to ask him?
Can we do those in the opposite order? That's called cheating. Honestly, I think I would be piggish, and I think I would ask him for advice. I think that he was a very good president, and I think that the application of emotional intelligence to political problems in a way that Tony dramatized, but that also we know from history is something that is the kind of thing I would want advice about. I would want advice about, for me, the thing that I think is the defining feature of 21st century America, which is that we are warlike. I would want his advice on how big a deal that is and whether that's fixable.
I would love to hear that. I mean, I was asked that question recently, and I think the question I would most want Rachel to ask is, how did you like Steven Spielberg's movie? I'll tell you, honestly, I think that if we're talking about if somehow Lincoln had survived and was now a 206-year-old, or 200 and what is born in 09. I'm so bad at math. This is really embarrassing. Anyway, yeah, 203, 4, whatever it is. He was like a really old guy, and the Civil War was like a long time ago. I would want him to say, because I'm absolutely certain about this, that to explain what has been outrageously, and I think outrageously unimaginatively misinterpreted. It's been imaginatively whatever. Anyway, the whole nonsense about Lincoln's ostensible growth as a person from somebody who liked slavery at the beginning of his administration to somebody who eventually came to oppose it, all that stuff. I think it's what we were talking about with President Obama. I mean, again, it takes absolutely nothing to understand, or it really shouldn't take much to understand, that this is somebody who, primarily originally for economic reasons perhaps, despised slavery from the very first articulations we have, knew that slavery was destroying this country, and not just this country, but the possibility of the success of the experiment of modern democracy, knew that democracy and slavery were absolutely immiscible, and knew that for the war to end, slavery had to end. And I won't rehearse all the tedious, but I'd like him to sort of clear that record, because I think it's time for us to get past what I think is just a preposterous version of this guy. It's a version that as a playwright I'm offended by because it doesn't make any sense. I think if I created a character based on this, no one would know how to act it because it doesn't. People aren't like that. So I think I'd like to hear him talk about that.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you not for your roles in theater or journalism, but as your roles as educators, and skip over the issue that progressive may be another word for thoughtful, and get your idea of where the two-party system is headed, given multiple parties in Lincoln's time and what passes for two parties in the current day.
I don't know, and I'm a bad predictor, but I do think that the Democratic Party will grow by necessity because of the responsibility of governing, even within a two-party system. Even if President Obama had lost re-election, Democrats are invested in governance, and so they're working on policy all the time, and they are fighting about policy amongst themselves, and they are trying stuff out. And the Republicans are doing that in the states. They're not doing that at the federal level. And that, because of that, because they're not taking governing responsibility at the federal level, they are not evolving in a way that's keeping pace with the demands of their environment. And so they're in trouble. So it's going to be interesting to watch what's happening, which I think is robust at the state level with the Republicans, try to trickle its way up into making that party something that has something to say nationally. And I think that Sam Brownback is somebody to watch, but again, I'm always wrong. And I think that watching what happens in Virginia is another place where it's Virginia, a state that's sort of representative as the country of a whole, that is experimenting with a pretty radical form of Republican governance there, where there's going to be changeover because they have off-year elections. That's going to be really interesting. The guy who's going to run for the Republican who's going to run for governor there is sort of a Rick Santorum. That's going to be really interesting. So the Democratic Party, I feel like, knows where it's going. The Republican Party is a mess, but it's an interesting and vital mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that a lot depends on what happens to the Tea Party and to the sort of what I think is the racist core of the sort of white supremacist core of that, whether or not they're really prepared to like step forward into the sunlight and declare that as their, the preservation of white American, white hegemony as their, if they don't, and they sort of fall away and form their own little third party crazy group, then maybe their disappearance would make it possible for blue dog Democrats and people who are more genuinely, conservative in the sense that I was talking about, people who believe in government but just think it needs to go at a kind of a deliberate pace, will join the Republican Party and give it fresh blood and or maybe, the Republican Party didn't exist before 1850 whatever, and it doesn't have, we can have new parties, and whether that means two parties or a more complicated system is going to be an interesting thing to see.
California and a few other places, they're experimenting with Australian rules voting, 1-2-3 voting, I always thought it should be called, or open primaries and things where party affiliation becomes less important. And that's happening, that sort of experimentation is happening at the city level, but also in some states where one of the parties has become irrelevant. It'll be interesting also to watch in places like Oklahoma, where the Democratic Party effectively doesn't exist, or Kansas, where the Democratic Party effectively doesn't exist, whether they start experimenting with other ways of distinguishing between types of people that doesn't attend to the name Democrat or Republican.
And interesting to see whether or not Texas secedes from the Union. and then whether or not Austin manages to secede from Texas.
Right, exactly.
Well, we have time for one more question.
Rachel, hi.
Hi.
I'm up here. Rachel,
Yes.
is everything under control? Would you be good enough to walk us through a Rachel day from beginning to end at MSNBC? Where do you live? Just
What is your
hold
address?
it, everybody. Generally, where do you come from on a given Wednesday? How does your day go? And what do you do when you get off the air?
Wow.
Wow, you've got a stalker.
I'm worried that this is going to be a bummer of a last question because I don't think this is a very interesting answer. That said, I live it. Maybe it'll be fascinating. I live in the West Village, and on the weekends I go home to Western Massachusetts. But on a weekday, I'm not a morning person, so I sleep as late as I can. And then sometimes I exercise and sometimes I don't. And sometimes that's the time before I go to work is the time when I can see other humans. I have two appointment times per day where I can see people, 10:30 a.m. or 10:30 p.m. So sometimes I see people, and then I go to work for noon, and then I read for a couple of hours solidly, and then I have a big news meeting with my staff where they say, this is what we think is going on in the world, and I erase it all, and I say, no, this is what I think is going on in the world. And then based on the big list of things going on in the world, we pick segments that we are going to turn into things that are on the TV show, and then they get assigned individual producers, and then I go read about those things, and they read about those things, and they get fact-checked and edited and written. Usually it's me dictating something that then gets written down and fact-checked and given to me, and then I edit it. And then they make visual things. Apparently on television, while I'm talking, sometimes visual things appear on the screen. I'm not a visual person at all, so I have almost no role to play at all in those things, except when it's key, like if it's like a chart. Make the chart this way, I'll explain that. But other than that, I don't even know what the visuals are on the screen usually. And I read and write and read and write and read and write and read and write, and every day it's a total shock when it's 8:40 p.m. and I get up my desk and I put on a gray blazer and I run down to the 3rd floor, and I'm late every day for the makeup ladies who are really nice, and I run to the makeup room and I get makeup, and it takes like 4 minutes because I've got them trained to go really fast, and then I run into the set and I sit down usually with 30 seconds to go. And then it's a shock every day when 9 o'clock rolls around. And then I do the show, and then I'm very strung out for the rest of the evening, and so I stay up late, and that's why I sleep late. Is that?
Does it take you? Do you feel that you're playing a character? Is there a Rachel Maddow character who's different from you? That when the camera turns on, do you feel that it's just you, or is it?
It's not a fake me, but it is a slice of me. So, like, I am a person who has depression, and I don't let depressed Rachel on television. That would be a boring hour. You know, and also, like, I am a person who can get angry, or, you know, has a range of other emotions that I don't think are the best way to do television. And so,
but when you're doing the broadcast, do you find yourself having to edit that kind of? I mean, sort of say to yourself, okay, this is depressed Rachel or angry Rachel, or and I mean, or is it I mean, I would imagine at this point it's more of a kind of a comfortable thing to slip into, or?
I think when I don't like writing for the eye. Like, I didn't like writing my book. I don't enjoy writing the way, but I don't mind writing for the voice. I don't mind writing things for me to speak. And when I am writing to speak, when I'm writing some words that I know I'm going to say, I think I write in a way that evokes the appropriate emotional range for presenting information on television in a way that will hopefully stick.
So, and that's something that we have in common, because we both write, but we prefer writing for people to speak it, rather than to read. So.
Well,
there we go.
When you have written like introductions to other people's work, when you have written essays and things, I feel like I see the same voice. When I write for the eye, when I'm writing, like when I wrote my book, I don't feel like it sounds like me.
But I thought it did.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thanks. I didn't feel that way.
Really? Huh? That's interesting.
Sorry.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Right. The last question is, will you both come back sometime, please,
Yes.
and do this some more?